Most car crashes are tragic but straightforward. But then there are the others. The ones so violent, bizarre, or chilling that the aftermath feels more like a nightmare than an accident report. In this video, we're diving into 5 car crash deaths that refuse to fade from memory. Not just because of the destruction, but because of the questions they left behind. Shattered glass, unexplained details, and scenes that investigators still can't forget. This is part 4 of the most disturbing car crash deaths ever recorded.
Celebrating her 21st birthday, killed in a horrific one-car crash on the Williamsburg Bridge. The man behind the wheel, a city traffic agent. He is now charged with DWI in the death of Amanda Miner.
It was March 16, 2017 in New York City. Amanda Miner had just turned 21. She was home in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, taking a break from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, where she was studying to become a social worker. That evening, she celebrated her milestone birthday the way so many young people do, surrounded by family, taking in the Broadway show Wicked, sharing dinner, and later meeting friends in Manhattan. But Amanda never made it home. At around 3:15 a.m., she climbed into the back seat of a gray Infiniti G37, thinking she was in safe hands. Behind the wheel was 26-year-old Stephen Hoy, an off-duty NYPD traffic enforcement agent. In the passenger seat sat his colleague, 24-year-old Michael Camacho. Amanda trusted them. She believed she was simply catching a ride back to Brooklyn after a night of celebrating. What she didn't know was that Hoy had been drinking heavily, 8 shots of vodka and 2 mixed drinks. His blood alcohol level was 0.12, far above the legal limit. Worse, he wasn't just drunk, he was reckless. On the Williamsburg Bridge, where the speed limit is just 35 miles per hour, Hoy pushed the Infiniti to a staggering 111 miles per hour. The car roared through the night, headlights blurring, the city racing by in a haze. And then, in an instant, everything shattered. Hoy lost control. The car slammed into a divider, then smashed into a support pillar with such force that the vehicle ripped apart, splitting into pieces like paper under a blade. Amanda, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was thrown from the wreckage. The impact was catastrophic. Emergency crews arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Amanda was declared dead at the scene. Just hours before, she had been alive, joyful, and full of plans. Now her family was waking up to their worst nightmare. Amanda's mother, Virginia Cabrera Miner, stood outside their Brooklyn home in disbelief. Just the night before, she had celebrated her daughter's 21st birthday. Now she was telling reporters through tears, "She's gone. She was a wonderful girl, my youngest. We just celebrated her birthday, and now I'll never see her graduate." Her professors remembered her as a student who radiated kindness. Friends described her as driven and compassionate. When the case went to court, Amanda's older sister Linda broke down. She told the judge, "I am completely heartbroken. I no longer have a sister, I just want to be with my sister." Her father, Jeffrey, stood holding a photo of Amanda, pleading with Hoy to carry forward the positive energy Amanda had given to others. The pain in that courtroom was unbearable, grief filling every word spoken by a family who would never see Amanda again. Hoy tried to explain himself. At the scene of the crash, he lied to police, claiming he'd only had 2 drinks. But prosecutors uncovered the truth. He had been drinking heavily all night. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter and vehicular manslaughter. He avoided a full trial, but he couldn't avoid prison. The judge sentenced him to 4 to 12 years. In court, Hoy said, "I'm very sorry. I hope her family can forgive me. We were celebrating her birthday and it was a traffic accident." But Amanda's family pushed back. She was not celebrating with him. She had trusted him, trusted that he would get her home safely. Instead, his recklessness had destroyed her future. Even as Hoy's mother insisted her son was a good man, a father to his 5-year-old daughter, and not a heavy drinker, Judge Melissa Jackson made it clear. "You will serve time," she told him, "but your punishment will also be living with what you did. That will stay with you forever." It was a Sunday night in March 2019 in Odessa, Ukraine. 33-year-old Victoria Kravchenko was sitting in the passenger seat of a BMW X6 next to 22-year-old Shamil Gav as the car raced through the streets. Witnesses said they were speeding alongside a Porsche, engines roaring, chasing adrenaline. What neither of them knew was that within minutes this ride would end in flames. Victoria wasn't just anyone. She was a mother of 2, a daughter and a businesswoman. She carried with her a story that connected the quiet streets of Odessa to the glamour of Hollywood. Her father, Valery Kravchenko, was once stunned by a revelation that linked their family tree to none other than Sylvester Stallone. It began decades earlier when Stallone's mother, Jackie, began digging into her family's roots in the Soviet Union. With help from Mikhail Gorbachev himself, the KGB traced her grandmother's line back to Odessa. The trail led straight to Valery's family, proving that the Kravchenkos and Stallones were distant cousins. Jackie flew to Odessa, where she met Valery face to face. He thought it was a joke, until she looked him in the eye and said, "Hello, Valery, how are you? It looks like you are the only living relation of our family." Back then, Valery was breaking barriers, opening the first privately owned gas station in the Soviet Union. He later introduced Jackie to his daughter, Victoria. She was young, full of energy, and had no idea how strange and extraordinary that meeting really was. Years later, Victoria recalled how surreal it felt to discover a bloodline connecting her to one of Hollywood's biggest icons. She laughed about how nobody believed her at first, until she explained how Jackie Stallone had sat with her like a girlfriend, offering travel tips, cracking jokes, and radiating energy even at her age. She remembered thinking her father and Sylvester shared the same piercing eyes. By 2019, Victoria had built a life of her own. She was a successful businesswoman, working in her father's companies, raising her children, and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone proud of her roots. But that March night, all of it ended in seconds. As the BMW tore through the streets, it slammed into a parked Hyundai Sonata. The impact sent the car spinning, metal screaming as it lost control. Then came the moment no one could take back. The BMW smashed into a utility pole carrying high-voltage wires. In an instant, the night lit up with fire. The car exploded, flames swallowed the vehicle, and Victoria and Shamil were trapped inside. There was no escape. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene was already beyond saving. All that was left was a blazing wreck, the smell of smoke heavy in the air, and 2 lives cut short. Security cameras captured the exact moment the car spun out of control, a few seconds that replayed over and over as investigators reviewed the footage. A thrill ride turned to silence.
We're learning more about the deadly crash that shut down I-20 in Kaufman County yesterday. 5 people died and a 6th person is in the hospital fighting for their life.
It was June 28th, 2025 in Kaufman County, Texas. For the McKellar family, it was the last stretch of a trip that should have ended safely in Fort Worth. Inside their Ford F-150 sat 3 generations. 52-year-old Zabar McKellar, a quiet, steady man, was behind the wheel. His wife, 45-year-old Christian, known to her loved ones as Sean, was at his side, her energy and warmth filling the truck the way it always did. In the back were their children, 15-year-old Case, a rising football star full of promise, and 20-year-old Evan, a college student with strength and intelligence beyond her years. With them, riding home, was their grandfather, 79-year-old Billy McKellar, a man with deep ties to East Texas, who had just attended a funeral in Tyler that very day. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive home. Instead, it became the moment everything changed. At the same time, barreling down the same stretch of interstate was a semi-truck driven by 27-year-old Alexis Osmani Gonzalez, companion of Florida. He was hauling under Hoper LLC. The affidavit later revealed the truth. He was exhausted, and at some point he fell asleep behind the wheel. His foot never touched the brakes. He was still moving at 75 miles per hour when the semi plowed into the back of the McKellar's pickup. The impact was catastrophic. The F-150 was crushed instantly, torn apart as the semi continued forward, colliding with 2 other 18-wheelers and several more vehicles, including a gray Jeep Compass. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. Police declared it a mass casualty event, but for the McKellar family, it was already too late. Zabar, Christian, their teenage son Case, and Billy were all pronounced dead at the scene. Their lives ended in an instant. The only survivor was 20-year-old Evan. She was airlifted to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, fighting for her life in the ICU. One of her feet had to be amputated. Though she lived, her road to recovery would be long and grueling. Another life was also lost in the chain reaction. 49-year-old Nicole Gregory of Dallas, who had been driving the Jeep Compass, was killed instantly. In total, 5 people were gone, and 1 young woman remained. Broken, but alive. The devastation rippled far beyond that highway. Pastor Rodney McIntosh, who called himself an adopted son of the McKellar family, said through tears, "I don't know how you make sense of moments like these." Friends and neighbors remembered Zabar as strong and steady, Krishan as vibrant and caring. Their son Case had been the pride of North Crowley High School's football team, a young man who had just led his team to a championship. His classmates began planning a vigil in his honor. Evan, still fighting for her life in the hospital, became the symbol of resilience, even as her heart carried the unbearable weight of loss. Billy's friends mourned just as deeply. One of his closest companions, Von D. Mosley, recalled their decades-long bond. "We were like two peas in a pod," he said. "I'm grateful for the time I had with him." But behind the grief, questions grew. Why was that semi still on the road? Why didn't the driver stop? Investigators confirmed he had never hit the brakes. Hopper LLC already had a history of violations, including issues with drivers going over their allowed hours. It was the early morning of January 12th, 2025, in Castleford, West Yorkshire. The temperature had dropped to a brutal -5 degrees Celsius, and the roads were glazed in ice, turning every turn into a risk. In the quiet of dawn, when most people were still asleep, 18-year-old Taylor Lupton was riding in the passenger seat of a white Volkswagen Golf. It was just after 6:20 a.m., a time when the world should still feel calm, but for Taylor, everything was about to change forever. Taylor wasn't just another young man. He had recently become a father, a boy from nearby Pontefract who was described as the kind of soul who could light up any room. Friends called him crazy sweet, a mix of energy, humor, and kindness. He had his whole life in front of him. But that morning, as he sat beside two 21-year-olds, a man and a woman, none of them could have known what the next few minutes would hold. They were driving down Weldon Road, a stretch locals had long whispered about, calling it cursed and dangerous. The car moved across a junction, but then something went horribly wrong. Witnesses said it was sudden, as if the vehicle had been yanked out of control by invisible hands. The Golf swerved violently, mounted the pavement, tore through a wire fence, and smashed into heavy bushes. The momentum didn't stop there. It slid down a steep slope, unstoppable, before plunging into the shadows of an oxidation tank at the Wallale sewage works. The tank was nearly empty, but deep enough to swallow the car from the road's view. By the time emergency crews arrived, the scene looked like a nightmare. The Volkswagen sat crumpled at the bottom, its windows shattered, one door wrenched open as if the car itself had screamed. Just yards away, they found Taylor's body. His two companions were pulled out alive and rushed to the hospital. But for Taylor, there was no saving him. Shock turned to anger when it was revealed the two survivors were arrested for suspected involvement in dangerous driving that may have caused Taylor's death. Locals stood in disbelief. One man recalled how you couldn't even see the car from the road. Another, 66-year-old Richard Iverson, said he'd seen crashes there before and had always feared that bend. That morning, he spotted a license plate lying on the footpath. He thought it was nothing more than a petty theft, only later realizing it was a clue to a much darker tragedy. As news spread, grief spilled out onto social media. Taylor's girlfriend, Megan, poured out her heart in a post that shattered those who read it. "You were my world. You made me better. I love you so much. I wish this wasn't real. I'll carry you in my heart forever." Friends wrote tributes filled with disbelief and sorrow. "Rest in peace, Taylor Lupton, you crazy sweet soul," Kira Reed said. "Just hours before, you were smiling, dancing, happy." Another friend added, "You were amazing, Tay. Never a dull moment. We love you." Soon, the crash site became a place of mourning. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes covered the ground. A message from his great-grandmother read, "To my lovely great-grandson, Taylor, taken too soon." His parents left a note that simply said, "Love you so much, Mom and Dad." His siblings wrote, "Going to miss you, big brother." The heartbreak in those words painted a picture of a family ripped apart, of a daughter who would grow up without her father. Police later confirmed what many had feared. The roads were slick with ice. Visibility was poor, and there were no warning signs at that stretch of road. Photos from the scene showed the car's broken path down the slope into the tank, a chilling reminder of how fragile life can be. Taylor was gone before his daughter's first birthday, before he had the chance to live the future everyone believed he was destined for. And now, the investigation continues, but no answer will ever bring him back. It was July 19th, 2025, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A single piece of news swept through the kingdom like wildfire. Prince Al-Walid bin Khaled bin Talal Saud, known across the world as the Sleeping Prince, had passed away. He was only 36 years old. For 2 decades, his life had been frozen in time, suspended between hope and heartbreak, as millions quietly followed his story. Families whispered his name in prayers, strangers held on to the thought of a miracle, and his father refused to let go. But after 20 years in a hospital bed, that fragile chapter finally came to an end. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to go back to where it all began. Prince Al-Walid was born on April 18, 1989, into one of the most powerful families in Saudi Arabia. His father, Prince Khaled bin Talal, was a respected royal. His uncle, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, was a billionaire known worldwide. His grandfather, Prince Talal, was one of the sons of King Abdulaziz, the very founder of modern Saudi Arabia. Al-Walid's future was written in power and responsibility. From a young age, he was raised with discipline, honor, and the expectation of greatness. By the age of 15, he was already training at a prestigious military academy in London, preparing for a future that seemed unstoppable. And then, in an instant, it was all taken away. In 2005, while in the United Kingdom, Al-Walid was in a devastating car crash. The impact left him with catastrophic brain injuries and severe internal damage. London doctors fought to stabilize him, but the truth was grim. He was flown back to Riyadh and admitted to King Abdulaziz Medical City. There, his body lived, but his eyes never opened again. Machines kept him alive. A ventilator breathed for him. A feeding tube nourished him. And from that day on, the prince who was once so full of promise was locked away in silence. Doctors had little hope. Many said recovery was impossible. In 2015, 10 years into his coma, the medical team even urged his father to consider ending life support. But Prince Khaled would not hear of it. He stayed by his son's side every single day, gripping his hand, whispering prayers, and believing that one day his son would return. He shared photos of himself holding Al-Walid's hand, decorating the hospital room for Ramadan, Eid, and Saudi National Day. It became less of a hospital ward and more of a shrine of devotion, and the world watched. For years, family, friends, and religious leaders visited Al-Walid. His younger brothers, Saud and Muhammad, spoke to him, updated him on family life, prayed beside him. They clung to hope in the smallest gestures. And then, in 2020, something extraordinary happened. A video surfaced online, showing the prince appearing to move his fingers and even lift his hand when someone called his name. The footage spread like wildfire. People everywhere believed this was the miracle they had been waiting for. Hope surged again. But doctors crushed the dream, saying it was nothing more than reflexes of a body trapped in a vegetative state. Still, the people refused to stop believing. They called him the sleeping prince. They shared old videos of him in uniform, young and strong, and they waited for the day he would awaken. But that day never came. On July 19th, 2025, after 20 long years in the same hospital room, Prince Al-Walid slipped away. His father broke the news on X, posting a haunting black and white photo of his son, along with a plea for prayers. The next day, funeral prayers were held at Imam Turki bin Abdullah Mosque in Riyadh. The doors were opened to the public, and thousands came to pay their respects. Crowds gathered outside Al-Fakhraya Palace, mourning a prince whose story had touched hearts far beyond the kingdom's borders. No official explanation was given. No one knows if his condition had worsened or if, after 2 decades of waiting, the family had finally made the impossible decision to let go. What is known is the impact he left behind. The hashtag #SleepingPrince trended once more as tributes poured in from around the globe. People remembered not just the tragedy of his youth, but the love that surrounded him for 20 years.